Welcome back, family. To everyone already subscribed to Exposed Cheaters by NDU Tale, thank you. Your time, your trust, and your comments keep this community alive. As you listen, share your thoughts, feelings, and lessons below so we can learn together. Settle in. The truth and the twist are coming. Let's get into it. The cruelest thing Amara did was betray her husband after 6 months of feeling ignored. Even though she knew how deeply he valued loyalty, it shattered the trust they once protected carefully, leaving a wound neither could easily explain. She never imagined herself capable of crossing that line, yet loneliness slowly pushed her toward choices she regretted. Friends judged quickly later, unaware of the silence that had grown inside her marriage. Here's how it happened. Understanding the months before that mistake explains the pressure, confusion, and emotional distance that led to everything unraveling. At the beginning, their marriage felt hopeful and balanced. Tund admired Amara's determination, while she appreciated his steadiness. They laughed easily, cooked together, and imagined a future that seemed secure. Their connection wasn't just physical. It was built on friendship, respect, and shared dreams. Those early months created a strong foundation, or so they believed. Neither imagined how routine stress could gradually weaken their closeness. They assumed love alone would keep everything intact, never considering how easily silence and fatigue could start replacing communication if they were not careful. If you love emotional relationship stories like this, hit like now and subscribe. You don't want to miss how this story unfolds. The first major shift came when Tund accepted a demanding promotion. The opportunity promised financial stability but required longer hours and constant availability. Initially, Amara encouraged him proudly. She saw how hard he had worked and wanted him to succeed. However, the new schedule slowly consumed his energy. Late dinners became normal, and conversations shortened. Sometimes he seemed present physically, but mentally elsewhere. Amara reassured herself it was temporary. Many couples survive busy seasons. Still, the subtle emotional distance began quietly settling into their daily life. Physical affection faded gradually. It started with postponed date nights, then less frequent hugs, and eventually awkward attempts at closeness that ended in apologies from Tund. He never spoke harshly. He simply seemed exhausted. Amara tried not to take it personally, yet repeated rejection slowly affected her confidence. She began wondering whether stress was the only reason. Doubt crept in quietly, making her question herself rather than addressing the issue openly. That internal questioning planted the first seeds of loneliness, even though she still deeply loved him. Loneliness rarely appears dramatically. For Amara, it arrived through ordinary moments. Quiet dinners, silent car rides, weekends without shared plans. She still supported Tund publicly, praising his dedication to friends. Privately, though, she felt increasingly invisible. She missed laughter, small compliments, and the simple reassurance of being noticed. Instead of voicing frustration clearly, she minimized her feelings. She feared adding pressure while he was already overwhelmed. Ironically, that protective silence only deepened the gap between them. Tund, meanwhile, believed he was sacrificing temporarily for their future. Work pressure, financial planning, and personal anxiety weighed heavily on him. He assumed Amara understood without needing constant explanation. When she seemed quiet, he interpreted it as patience rather than distress. This misunderstanding became central to their struggle. Both cared deeply but stopped expressing vulnerability. Without realizing it, they began living parallel emotional lives instead of shared one. Months passed. Their conversations grew practical rather than personal. Bills, schedules, and family updates replaced emotional check-ins. Amara noticed how rarely they laughed together anymore. She sometimes rehearsed serious conversations in her mind, but hesitated each time. She feared conflict or appearing demanding. The longer she waited, the harder speaking up became. Eventually, silence started feeling normal, even though it hurt. Around this time, Amara met Femi at work. He was friendly, attentive, and naturally conversational. Initially, their interactions were harmless. Casual chats during lunch breaks offered contrast to the quiet tension at home. Femi listened closely, remembered details, and noticed when she seemed tired or distracted. Those small acknowledgments meant more than she expected. She knew boundaries mattered. Being married, she reminded herself constantly not to misinterpret friendliness. Yet emotional validation can be powerful. After months of feeling overlooked, simple attention felt comforting. She did not immediately recognize how much she depended on those conversations until they became part of her daily routine. At home, things remained unchanged. Tun continued working late, often preoccupied even when present. Amara tried once more to initiate a serious conversation, but it ended quickly. He apologized again, promised improvement, and then returned to pressing responsibilities. She accepted the explanation outwardly, but inwardly felt unheard. Emotional frustration started mixing with resentment. She never intended to blame him entirely, yet she wished he would notice her struggle without constant prompting. That expectation, though common, proved unrealistic. Relationships usually require explicit communication, something both were avoiding. Meanwhile, Femi's role in her life grew subtly. He asked about her interests, family memories, and ambitions beyond work. Those conversations reminded her of earlier days with Tund. She didn't compare consciously, but the emotional contrast existed. Amara sometimes felt guilty for enjoying those talks. Still, she rationalized them as harmless friendship. She believed she remained in control, confident she would never cross a serious boundary. Many people think the same before unexpected emotional vulnerability changes decisions. Stress outside marriage also contributed. Financial responsibilities, extended family expectations, and personal career uncertainty added pressure. Without strong emotional support at home, these challenges felt heavier. She longed for reassurance more than anything else. Tund, unaware of her internal struggle, assumed stability meant everything was fine. He trusted her deeply and never imagined their bond weakening significantly. That trust later made the eventual revelation more painful. The turning point came after an especially difficult week. Amara felt overwhelmed professionally and emotionally. Tun canceled another planned evening together due to urgent work. He sounded apologetic, but exhaustion overshadowed warmth. That evening, she stayed late at work finishing tasks. Femi noticed her mood and offered company. They talked longer than usual, discussing stress, relationships, and personal fears. The conversation felt unusually intimate. Emotional vulnerability can blur judgment. She didn't plan betrayal. She simply wanted comfort and understanding. Yet boundaries that seemed firm earlier suddenly felt less defined under emotional strain. Afterward, guilt arrived quickly. The brief moment of closeness didn't solve loneliness. Instead, it created anxiety, secrecy, and regret. She realized she had complicated an already fragile situation. If this story is hitting you emotionally, drop a red heart in the comments and subscribe. Your support keeps these powerful stories coming. Sleep became difficult. She replayed events repeatedly, wishing she had chosen differently. The realization that she had hurt someone she loved weighed heavily. For several days, she avoided both men emotionally. She spoke minimally with Femi and acted normally with Tund, though internally conflicted. That emotional tension proved exhausting. Eventually, she decided honesty mattered more than temporary peace. Secrets, she believed, would only deepen problems. Gathering courage, she asked Tun for a serious conversation. The discussion began cautiously. She first explained her loneliness, the months of feeling emotionally disconnected, and her attempts to communicate indirectly. Tun listened quietly, visibly troubled. When she admitted her mistake, the hurt on his face was immediate. He didn't react dramatically. Instead, he became very still. That quiet reaction unsettled her more than anger might have. Trust, once shaken, rarely repairs quickly. Tund expressed confusion, pain, and disappointment. He also acknowledged a prolonged emotional absence, though he didn't see it as justification. Both recognized multiple issues: lack of communication, stress mismanagement, and unmet emotional needs. The conversation, though painful, opened long-avoided dialogue. Counseling became their next step. Neither wanted immediate separation, yet neither believed ignoring problems would help. Professional guidance offered structured communication tools. Early counseling sessions were tense. Each carried defensive instincts alongside genuine hope. Gradually, They learned to articulate feelings without accusation. Tund revealed anxiety he had hidden for months. Career pressure and fear of failure consumed him more than he admitted. Emotional withdrawal had been unintentional but significant. Amara shared how rejection affected her self-esteem. She clarified she needed emotional reassurance as much as physical closeness. Hearing this directly surprised Tund. Progress wasn't linear. Some days felt hopeful, others reopened old wounds. Still, consistent effort began rebuilding mutual understanding. They reintroduced small habits, shared meals without phones, scheduled conversations, occasional outings. These steps seemed simple, yet proved meaningful. Forgiveness remained complex. Tund struggled with lingering doubt, while Amara worked to rebuild credibility through transparency and patience. Friends and family largely remained unaware. They preferred privacy, focusing on healing rather than external judgment. Months later, their relationship wasn't identical to before. However, communication improved significantly. Both acknowledged vulnerability more openly. They learned silence can harm relationships as much as overt conflict. Avoidance rarely resolves emotional needs. Amara continued reflecting on her decision, accepting responsibility, while understanding contributing factors. That balanced perspective helped growth. Tund also recognized the importance of emotional presence, not only financial provision. He made deliberate efforts to remain engaged despite work demands. Whether full trust would ever return completely remained uncertain. Still, both valued the progress achieved. Ultimately, they discovered relationships require continual attention. Love alone isn't always sufficient without communication, empathy, and mutual effort. Their story didn't end perfectly, but moved toward greater awareness. Sometimes growth comes through mistakes, provided both partners commit to change. And though the scar remained, it also served as a reminder. Emotional silence can be dangerous, but honest dialogue, even after painful missteps, can gradually rebuild connection if both people truly want it. Healing didn't happen overnight for Tund and Amara. Even after counseling started helping them communicate better, the memory of betrayal lingered quietly between them. Sometimes it surfaced unexpectedly, in small pauses during conversation or cautious glances that neither openly addressed. Amara understood rebuilding trust would take patience, and Tund knew holding on to constant resentment would prevent progress. Both were learning, slowly, that recovery required active effort rather than hopeful waiting. It was uncomfortable work, but neither wanted to abandon what they had built together without at least trying sincerely. One unexpected challenge was rebuilding normal conversation. Previously effortless discussions now sometimes felt rehearsed. They both worried about saying the wrong thing. Amara feared reopening wounds, while Tund feared appearing controlling or suspicious. Counselors encouraged him to accept occasional awkwardness as part of growth. Over time, these conversations became easier. They rediscovered humor in small moments again. That laughter didn't erase past pain, but it created space where healing could grow. Gradually, daily interactions began resembling their earlier partnership rather than the tense silence that had defined the previous months. Trust building involves transparency. Amara volunteered information openly about her schedule, friendships, and feelings without being asked. She wanted Tund to feel secure, not monitored. Meanwhile, Tund worked on expressing needs directly instead of withdrawing. He admitted when stress overwhelmed him instead of pretending everything was fine. That honesty surprised Amara positively. It helped her feel included again rather than excluded from his emotional world. This mutual openness didn't instantly restore confidence, but it created a foundation stronger than avoidance ever had. They also revisited the topic of intimacy carefully. Rather than focusing solely on physical closeness, counseling emphasized emotional reconnection first. Shared activities returned slowly. Evening walks, cooking together, watching movies without distractions. These simple experiences rebuilt comfort. Physical affection eventually followed naturally, without pressure. Both understood that genuine connection couldn't be forced. It had to grow from renewed trust and mutual respect. Recognizing this removed some anxiety they had both been carrying silently. External pressures didn't disappear, however. Work deadlines still existed, financial responsibilities continued, and family expectations occasionally caused stress. The difference now was how they handled those pressures together. Instead of isolating themselves emotionally, they checked in regularly. Short conversations like, "How are you really doing today?" became surprisingly powerful. They learned emotional maintenance, like physical health, requires consistent attention rather than emergency responses only when problems become severe. Femi gradually faded from Amara's daily life. She maintained professional courtesy, but established clear boundaries. That decision wasn't driven by guilt alone, but by recognition that emotional clarity mattered. She wanted no ambiguity in her commitment moving forward. The distance helped both her and Tun focus on rebuilding their marriage rather than lingering external complications. It also allowed Amara to reflect honestly on what she had learned from that difficult chapter. Some friends noticed positive changes without knowing the full story. They commented on how relaxed the couple seemed compared to months earlier. Those observations encouraged Tun and Amara privately. They realized progress was visible externally as well as internally. Still, they chose not to share details widely. Privacy allowed healing without additional opinions or judgments complicating their process. Occasionally, setbacks occurred. Certain memories triggered emotional reactions, particularly for Tund. When that happened, instead of shutting down, he voiced his discomfort. Amara listened without defensiveness. These moments, though uncomfortable, actually strengthened their bond because they practiced addressing issues immediately rather than suppressing them. Each successfully navigated setback increased confidence in their ability to handle future challenges. Amara also focused on personal growth independent of marriage. She pursued hobbies she had postponed and strengthened friendships that provided healthy support. This personal balance reduced pressure on the relationship to fulfill every emotional need. Tun did something similar, developing stress management strategies through exercise and structured downtime. Individual well-being contributed significantly to their collective stability. As months turned into a year since the crisis began, their perspective shifted. The betrayal remained a painful memory, but it no longer dominated daily interactions. They could discuss it calmly when necessary without emotional escalation. That ability signaled meaningful healing. Neither forgot what happened, yet both integrated the experience into their broader relationship story rather than allowing it to define everything permanently. They eventually celebrated their anniversary quietly. The occasion wasn't extravagant, but it felt significant. Both acknowledged privately how close they had come to losing each other. That awareness made the celebration more meaningful than earlier anniversaries, when stability had seemed automatic. Gratitude replaced complacency. Looking back, Amara recognized how dangerous prolonged silence can be in relationships. She understood now that expressing needs clearly isn't selfish. It's necessary. Waiting for someone to guess emotional struggles often leads to misunderstanding. This lesson shaped how she communicated moving forward. Tun learned a complementary lesson. Providing materially doesn't replace emotional presence. He had believed financial stability demonstrated love sufficiently during stressful periods. Now he understood consistent emotional connection mattered equally. Balancing responsibilities became his ongoing goal. Their journey didn't become perfect. Like any couple, they still faced disagreements and stressful periods. The difference was their approach. They addressed issues earlier, spoke more openly, and assumed goodwill rather than neglect. These habits reduced escalation significantly. Sometimes they even discussed helping other couples facing communication struggles, though always cautiously. They didn't present themselves as experts, just people who had learned difficult lessons. Sharing selectively felt meaningful, without exposing private details publicly. Years later, the experience remained a defining chapter, but not the conclusion of their story. It became evidence of both vulnerability and resilience. They understood how easily connection can weaken, and how deliberate effort can restore it. Ultimately, their marriage survived not because mistakes never happened, but because both partners eventually chose honesty, accountability, and consistent emotional presence. Those choices, repeated daily, proved more powerful than any single misstep. And in quiet moments together, they sometimes reflected on how close they had come to permanent separation. That awareness fostered appreciation. They no longer assumed time together was guaranteed. They treated it as something valuable requiring care. Their story became less about betrayal and more about communication, growth, and second chances. While scars remained, they also served as reminders to stay attentive, empathetic, and honest. Because in the end, relationships rarely fail from one dramatic moment alone. More often, they weaken through small silences and strengthen again through small, consistent act of understanding. Time kept moving, and with it came a quieter kind of healing neither of them expected. The intense emotions that once filled every conversation slowly softened. Not gone, just less overwhelming. Tun noticed he could smile at Amara again without immediately remembering the pain. Amara noticed he no longer watched her with the same guarded caution. These small shifts reassured them that recovery wasn't just possible. It was already happening, step by step, often in ways subtle enough that they only recognized them later. They began creating new routines intentionally. Friday evenings became their dedicated time together, regardless of work pressure. Sometimes they went out. Other times they stayed home cooking or watching old movies they both loved. Consistency mattered more than the activity itself. These moments rebuilt familiarity, helping replace difficult memories with new, calmer experiences. Over time, those evenings became something they both looked forward to, proof that intentional connection could gradually rebuild emotional security. Communication also evolved. Instead of waiting for major issues, they checked in regularly about smaller feelings. Questions like, "Are you feeling supported lately?" or "Anything stressing you out I should know about?" became normal. These conversations prevented problems from quietly growing unchecked. It wasn't always comfortable, but it was effective. Both recognized how much earlier pain had resulted from assumptions rather than honest dialogue. Now they preferred clarity, even when conversations felt awkward. Tun grew more comfortable expressing vulnerability, something he once struggled with. Previously, he had equated emotional restraint with strength. Counseling helped him understand that openness actually strengthened trust. When work overwhelmed him, he said so directly. When he felt insecure or worried, he shared it instead of withdrawing. Amar appreciated this shift deeply. It made her feel included rather than excluded, reinforcing emotional partnership instead of silent coexistence. Amara, for a part, became more assertive about her needs. She no longer minimized feelings to avoid conflict. If she felt disconnected, she said it early. If she needed reassurance, she asked clearly. This directness initially felt unnatural, but it quickly proved healthier than quiet resentment. Tun responded positively, relieved to understand her expectations rather than guessing incorrectly. Their relationship began operating with clearer emotional signals than before. Extended family occasionally introduced new stress. Relatives sometimes questioned why the couple seemed more private than before. Neither felt obligated to explain everything. Protecting their healing process became a shared priority. They politely maintained boundaries while focusing on their own progress. That mutual decision strengthened their sense of teamwork, something they had nearly lost during their most difficult period. Career demands still fluctuated. Some months were busier than others. The key difference was proactive planning. When Tun anticipated heavy workloads, he informed Amara early. Together they adjusted expectations temporarily rather than allowing frustration to grow unexpectedly. This collaborative approach reduced tension significantly. It reminded them both that challenges were external obstacles, not personal rejections. Occasionally, memories resurfaced unexpectedly for Amara as well. She sometimes felt lingering guilt, especially when witnessing Tun's renewed efforts. Rather than suppressing those feelings, she discussed them openly. Tun reassured her that while the past mattered, he valued present commitment more. Those conversations gradually replaced guilt with responsibility. A healthier emotional balance focused on growth rather than self-punishment. Their social life slowly expanded again. For a while, they had withdrawn from gatherings due to internal tension. As comfort returned, they accepted invitations cautiously. Friends noticed they seemed closer than before, though few knew why. Shared laughter in group settings reinforced their progress, reminding them they could enjoy life together beyond problem-solving discussions. One milestone came unexpectedly. They successfully navigated a significant disagreement without emotional escalation. Previously, conflict might have triggered silence or defensiveness. This time, they discussed different opinions calmly, reached compromise, and moved forward without lingering tension. That experience boosted their confidence enormously. It proved they weren't just recovering. They were improving relationship skills overall. They also began discussing long-term plans again, something that had paused during uncertainty. Conversations about travel, financial goals, and personal aspirations returned. These forward-looking discussions signaled renewed confidence in their shared future. Hope gradually replaced hesitation. Sometimes they reflected on what might have happened if honesty had come earlier. Those reflections weren't about blame anymore, but about learning. Both acknowledged they had contributed differently to the earlier disconnect. Recognizing shared responsibility helped prevent oversimplified narratives of fault. Gratitude became more visible in their daily interactions. Simple acknowledgments like, "Thanks for being patient with me," or "I appreciate how you handled that today," became common. These affirmations reinforced positive behaviors while fostering emotional warmth. Over time, appreciation became habitual rather than occasional. They also embraced humor again. Playful teasing, inside jokes, and spontaneous laughter returned. Humor had been one of their earliest bonding elements, and its return felt like reclaiming a part of themselves. Laughter didn't erase past pain, but it balanced it, reminding them joy remained possible. Personal growth continued individually. Amara pursued professional development opportunities she had previously postponed. Tund explored hobbies that reduced stress effectively. Supporting each other's individual interests created healthy independence within their partnership. Occasionally, they discussed their journey philosophically. They recognized relationships evolve constantly, not just after crises. Continuous adjustment, communication, and empathy seemed essential regardless of past mistakes. This perspective reduced fear of future challenges because they felt better equipped to handle them. Their story ultimately shifted from crisis management to maintenance of connection. That transition felt significant. Instead of constantly repairing damage, they focused on nurturing stability. Emotional energy once spent on tension now supported shared experiences and personal growth. Years later, the difficult period remained part of their history, but no longer defined their identity as a couple. Friends described them as balanced and communicative, unaware of the deeper lessons behind that perception. Tun and Amara understood those lessons intimately. Sometimes, during quiet evenings, they acknowledged how fragile relationships can be when communication falters. That awareness didn't create fear. It inspired attentiveness. They valued presence, honesty, and empathy more consciously than before. And though neither would ever recommend learning through such painful experience, they accepted that growth had come from it. Their marriage, once strained by silence, now rested on clearer communication and mutual awareness. Not perfection, but resilience. Because ultimately, what sustained them wasn't avoiding mistakes entirely. It was choosing repeatedly and deliberately to remain honest, attentive, and emotionally present with each other, even when doing so required vulnerability and effort. As time moved forward, stability slowly became their new normal. The constant emotional vigilance they once needed started fading into simple, everyday comfort. Tun no longer felt the urge to question every silence, and Amara no longer carried a heavy fear that she had permanently broken something irreplaceable. Their home felt lighter again. Conversations flowed without careful planning, and laughter returned more frequently. Neither considered their relationship perfect, but both recognized how far they had come. That awareness created quiet pride, the kind built through perseverance rather than effortless happiness. One evening, while organizing old photos, they stumbled upon pictures from their early marriage. Smiling faces, carefree moments, hopeful expressions, reminders of a time before stress and distance complicated things. Instead of sadness, the photos sparked reflection. They talked openly about what they had learned since those days. Growth, they realized, sometimes requires confronting uncomfortable truths. Their younger selves hadn't understood how essential communication truly was. Now, those lessons shaped their daily habits. The past no longer haunted them. It informed them. Tund eventually achieved better balance at work. He set clearer boundaries and prioritized personal time without guilt. Success, he discovered, meant little without emotional well-being at home. Amara supported this shift fully, appreciating his intentional presence. In turn, she pursued her own ambitions confidently, knowing their relationship rested on stronger communication than before. Mutual encouragement replaced the quiet tension that once existed. They became partners again, not just cohabitants navigating separate pressures. They also began mentoring younger couples informally, not by sharing private details, but by encouraging openness, patience, and empathy. Friends sometimes sought their advice, noticing their calm approach to challenges. Tund and Amara always emphasized one simple principle: speak before silence grows heavy. That lesson had reshaped their own lives. Offering it to others felt meaningful, without reopening old wounds. It allowed them to transform past pain into constructive guidance. Trust, once fragile, eventually stabilized. It didn't mean forgetting. It meant integrating the experience into their shared history. Both understood human vulnerability better now. Instead of assuming problems would never happen again, they focused on maintaining connection actively. That realistic optimism strengthened their bond more than naive certainty ever had. They were no longer afraid of difficult conversations. In fact, they welcomed them as opportunities to stay emotionally aligned. Anniversaries took on deeper significance. Each year together felt earned rather than automatic. They celebrated quietly, valuing presence over extravagance. Sometimes they simply shared a meal and reflected on progress made. These rituals reinforced gratitude. They reminded each other not to take stability for granted, a perspective forged during their most challenging months. There were still occasional disagreements. Of course, no relationship becomes conflict-free. The difference was how quickly they resolved issues. Avoidance was no longer their default. Direct communication, empathy, and accountability guided their responses. These skills, once learned through necessity, became natural habits over time. Looking back, Amara no longer defined herself solely by her mistake. She acknowledged it honestly while recognizing her broader growth. Tund, likewise, moved beyond seeing himself only as the wrong partner. He recognized his own emotional withdrawal had contributed to earlier distance, even if it hadn't justified betrayal. This balanced perspective prevented lingering resentment from dominating their future. They both understood something profound. Relationships aren't sustained by grand gestures alone. Small, consistent acts of attention matter more. Listening carefully, expressing appreciation, and staying emotionally available became their quiet priorities. Those daily choices strengthened their connection far more than occasional dramatic declarations ever could. Years later, their story settled into something peaceful. Not flawless, not dramatic, simply steady. They appreciated ordinary evenings, shared responsibilities, and mutual understanding. The crisis that once threatened everything had ultimately reshaped how they loved, communicated, and supported each other. It remained a chapter in their history, but no longer the defining one. Sometimes, when friends admired their apparent harmony, Tund and Amara exchanged knowing smiles. They understood the effort behind that harmony. It wasn't accidental. It was built through honesty, accountability, patience, and a willingness to grow individually and together. And perhaps that was a real lesson of their journey. Mistakes can wound deeply, silence can create distance, but consistent effort and open communication can rebuild connection when both people genuinely commit to the process. Their marriage didn't return to what it once was. It became something wiser, less idealistic, more intentional, and ultimately stronger. If you enjoyed this powerful comeback story, subscribe for more real-life drama, redemption, and karma stories every week. And check the next video on your screen now.